Hey friends, sometimes an ordinary morning can turn into a moment you'll never forget. As the sun rose over Willow Park, a playful puppy named Eli vanished beneath the earth, leaving his mother Maddie howling with desperate hope
Yelp.
and a whole community holding its breath. What followed was a rescue that pulled strangers
Yelp.
together and reminded everyone how powerful loyalty and courage can be. If you've ever witnessed a moment of pure devotion or needed a reason to believe in the goodness around us, this story is for you. Share your thoughts below, like or subscribe if it touches you, and let's begin. The first light of dawn crept over Willow Park, painting the grass in a soft silver glow and casting long shadows from the old oak trees that lined the footpaths. The world was still and expectant, dew shimmering on each blade of grass. A gentle breeze whispered through the branches, carrying the scent of wet earth and the faint promise of a new day. In the middle of all this peace, Eli, a rambunctious German shepherd pup just a few months old, bounded along the pathway, ears perked, tail spinning in wild excitement. The leash clipped to his collar trailed behind, its other end dangling from the hand of his mother, Maddie. She was a seasoned, sturdy German shepherd with wise amber eyes and a patient air, the kind of dog who had seen her share of sunrises and storms. But today, Maddie felt the tension in the air. Maybe it was the way the park felt too empty, or the distant sound of something shifting beneath the earth. Her steps grew cautious as she led Eli toward their favorite spot by the old well, a place she remembered from her own puppy days, now half forgotten by most. Eli, however, was pure joy. He chased after a butterfly, skidding across the grass, his big paws outpacing his balance. Maddie barked softly, a gentle warning, but Eli only glanced back with mischief in his eyes, as if daring the world to catch him. Suddenly, there was a shift, a soft crumble beneath Eli's paws as he veered off the path. The earth gave way, a patch of loose stones tumbling and sliding. Eli's yelp split the morning silence, echoing sharp and terrified. In an instant, he disappeared, vanishing into a hole in the earth as dust and pebbles clattered down after him. For a single, endless heartbeat, the park was silent. Then Maddie sprang forward with a wild, primal force, every muscle tensed. Her claws scraped furiously at the edge of the crumbled stones, sending more dirt tumbling into the darkness below. She barked, a sharp, desperate sound that cracked through the morning like thunder. Her eyes were wild with fear, her body tense and trembling as she lunged again and again toward the hole, her pup's leash now a useless ribbon on the grass. The well, hidden for decades under weeds and neglect, had swallowed Eli without mercy. Its mouth was a jagged ring of old stone, damp with years of rain and moss, the opening barely wider than a manhole. Maddie barked again, her voice rising in pitch, echoing down into the darkness. She strained to peer inside, frantic, her breaths coming fast and shallow. Her world had shrunk to a single yawning hole, and the faint, terrified whimpers rising up from deep below. She circled the well, panic radiating from every inch of her. She clawed at the grass, searching for a way in, her nails scraping helplessly at stone. Her leash snapped and dragged, catching on a root before pulling free. For a brief, wild moment, she almost dove in after her puppy, but some instinct, older than memory, held her back. Above the well, the park was waking. A lone jogger, earbuds in, rounded the corner, barely noticing Maddie at first. But the sight of her, a large dog, frantic and alone, barking at the earth, made him slow. Maddie spun toward him, eyes wide, tail low, her whole body pleading for help. The jogger hesitated, then approached, pulling his earbuds free. Maddie barked at him, desperate, and then looked back at the well, her meaning clear. He followed her gaze and edged closer, peering into the darkness. As his eyes adjusted, he saw a flash of fur deep below and heard Eli's thin, frightened whimper. The realization hit him like a punch. He stumbled back, face pale, before shouting for help. His voice rang out across the park, a cry splitting the quiet morning, urgent and sharp. Maddie never left the edge. Her nose pressed to the cold stone, her body rigid with terror and hope. She let out another series of howls, each one longer, rawer, more desperate than the last. The sound echoed off the empty playground, bounced across the silent tennis courts, and drifted toward the distant parking lot, where a few cars idled in the early light. One by one, the world started to notice. A woman walking her beagle stopped, eyes wide. A man with a newspaper and a thermos paused mid-sip. Maddie's cries, wild and untamed, drew them in, each person pulled closer by the simple, universal fear and love in her voice. In the well, Eli whimpered, his voice faint but alive. The pup's paws scrambled against the slick, mossy stone, but the shaft was too deep and narrow. Above, the sky brightened, but inside the well, it was all shadows, cold and damp. Maddie paced the rim, never letting her eyes leave the darkness. For her, there was no world outside the circle of stone. Every sound, every scent, every hope was focused on Eli. The leash, once a symbol of safety, was now a useless tether fluttering on the grass. The jogger pulled out his phone, voice shaking as he dialed 911. Maddie barked at him, then back into the well, unwilling to let a single second pass in silence. Her heart hammered in her chest, each beat a drum of urgency. As the first sirens echoed in the distance, Maddie pressed closer to the edge, her body trembling with a mixture of fear and fierce determination. Around her, the small crowd grew, drawn by the drama unfolding at the heart of Willow Park. But for Maddie, nothing existed but the well and the faint, hopeful sound of Eli's cry rising from below. And in that suspended, breathless morning, a mother's howl carried the promise. She would not leave, not until her pup was safe. Maddie's cries did not fade. They grew, echoing through every path and open field of Willow Park. The early jogger, still wide-eyed from what he'd witnessed, stood by the crumbling stones, his phone pressed to his ear, his free hand shaking as he relayed the emergency. He kept glancing back at Maddie, as if hoping she might somehow explain how this could be fixed. But Maddie was beyond human comfort or explanation. She darted back and forth along the rim of the well, her claws scraping the grass raw, chest heaving. She barked, sharp, pleading, demanding, each sound sharper than the last, fueled by a primal urgency. Her eyes, wild with terror, locked onto every person who drew near. She seemed to beg, "Help him! Do something!" The park, always calm at sunrise, was now thick with a rising sense of crisis. A small crowd began to gather, people drawn by the strange, desperate symphony of Maddie's barks. An elderly woman with a cane clutched her cardigan tighter, staring in shock. Two teenagers on bikes wheeled closer, exchanging uneasy glances. A mother with a stroller stopped, baby wide-eyed and silent, sensing the tension in the air. Maddie circled again, refusing to rest. She snapped at her own leash, then lunged at the rim, as if she might claw her way inside. Her paws bled a little from the sharp stones, but she barely noticed. Every nerve in her body vibrated with the need to act, to save Eli. The jogger tried to speak soothingly to her. "Easy, girl. Help's coming, I promise." But Maddie's panic only intensified. She ran at him, barking, then wheeled back to the well, her entire body a living signal flare. The woman with the cane called out, "Is there someone down there?" The jogger nodded, voice breaking as he answered, "A puppy. He fell. He's trapped." Word spread quickly, rippling out from the well to every corner of the park. Someone called animal control, another dialed the local ranger station. A man in a neon vest ran up, waving his arms. "Step back! Please, everyone, give the dog some space!" But Maddie refused to move. She planted herself at the edge, a living blockade, her head hanging over the void, ears straining for Eli's cries. A moment later, a faint yip drifted up from the darkness. A plea, a lifeline. Maddie's body jerked at the sound, hope and terror warring in her chest. She howled again, the sound ripping through her as if it might reach down and pull Eli up by force. People pressed closer, drawn by something more powerful than curiosity. A sense of shared urgency gripped the crowd. This was no ordinary accident, but a crisis that demanded attention, action, even courage. One of the teenagers tried to peer into the well, but Maddie snarled, warning him back. Her protective instincts sharpening. She was wild, almost feral with fear, but her meaning was clear. No one gets close unless they're here to help. At the rim, the ground was slick with dew and Maddie's frantic pawing. A gust of wind stirred fallen leaves, scattering them across the grass, but the park felt frozen in place. Every eye watched Maddie, every ear strained to catch the next sound from Eli. The jogger, shaken but resolute, called out, "We need a rope. Someone, anything we can lower down." But the crowd only had phones, water bottles, and startled faces. The sense of helplessness thickened, pressing in from all sides. Suddenly, a pair of park rangers jogged into view, radios crackling. One was Daniel, a broad-shouldered man with a calm face and gentle eyes. He slowed as he approached the chaos, taking in the scene, the crowd, the frantic dog, the open wound in the earth. For a moment, his gaze softened. He remembered the ache of losing his own childhood dog, the way panic and hope tangled together in moments like this. Maddie met his eyes, desperate and pleading. Daniel knelt beside her, speaking in low, steady tones. "It's okay, girl. I'm here. We're gonna help your pup." His words, calm and measured, cut through the panic. Maddie stilled for just a moment, enough for Daniel to inch closer to the rim and peer into the darkness. He called down softly, "Hey there, little guy. Hang in there." Eli's whimper floated up, thin but alive. Daniel's heart clenched. He reached for his radio and spoke quickly, his voice steady. "This is Ranger Daniel at Willow Park. We have a puppy trapped in a well. Requesting immediate rescue response. Send everything you've got." Maddie pressed herself against Daniel, seeking comfort but never taking her eyes off the hole. Daniel scratched behind her ears, feeling her tremble. Around them, the crowd grew quiet, united by a shared sense of helplessness and hope. Minutes passed like hours. The crowd shifted, anxious but unwilling to leave. Daniel's partner, Officer Grant, cleared space around the well, marking it off with bright orange cones. A neighbor arrived with a thick blanket, setting it on the grass for Maddie. She ignored it, focused only on the void where her pup had vanished. Maddie's loyalty and fear radiated outward, touching everyone, even the skeptics. Those who'd only stopped for a quick morning walk felt a knot in their stomachs. The crisis was now undeniable, a living thing that pulled strangers together. Maddie, relentless, refused to give up or leave her post. Finally, the wail of sirens broke the silence, a promise that help was on the way. Daniel met Maddie's gaze and nodded. "Hold on, girl. We're not giving up." Maddie answered with a long, broken howl, her love for Eli echoing through the park and into the hearts of everyone listening. The arrival of the park rangers marked a subtle shift in the air. The adrenaline spike of crisis gave way to a tense, anxious waiting, a hush that felt like everyone was holding their breath together. Daniel knelt at the edge of the well, his calm composure a small anchor for the frayed nerves of the growing crowd. His presence, sturdy and quietly confident, soothed Maddie just enough for her shivers to slow, but she never left his side, pressed close, her eyes fixed on the darkness below. Daniel spoke softly, almost in a whisper, his words meant for Maddie as much as for the terrified pup. "I know it's hard, girl. We're here. We'll get him out, I promise." There was a sincerity in his voice that came not just from duty, but from something deeper, a memory that tugged at him, barely beneath the surface. He remembered a time, years ago, when he'd been just a boy and his own dog, Scout, had disappeared on a stormy night. Daniel had waited in the rain for hours, calling Scout's name until his voice broke. When Scout finally returned, muddy and limping but alive, Daniel had cried into her fur, promising never to let her out of his sight again. That old pain lingered now, fueling his determination to help Maddie and Eli. As he sat with Maddie, Daniel reached out and stroked her neck, feeling the tension humming beneath her fur. "Hang in there," he murmured. Maddie's breathing steadied, if only for a moment, as she leaned into his touch. Around them, the crowd settled into uneasy stillness. Some sat cross-legged on the grass. Others stood with arms folded, eyes darting between Maddie, Daniel, and the well. There was a strange intimacy in their shared helplessness, a group of strangers united by the simple hope of seeing a small life pulled from the dark. Officer Grant moved quietly among them, gathering names and numbers, promising updates. The jogger who'd first called for help paced the perimeter, wringing his hands, while the woman with the beagle dabbed at her eyes. A group of children, bundled in bright jackets, drew closer, their parents holding them back, but unable to keep them away from the drama at the heart of the park. The only sounds now were Maddie's soft whimpers and the occasional heartbreaking echo from Eli far below. Every time he whimpered, Maddie responded, her head dipping lower over the stones, as if she could will her love down into the darkness to reach him. Daniel leaned further over the well, careful not to disturb the fragile rim. "Hey, Eli," he called. "We're right here, buddy. Keep talking to us." His voice was gentle, his tone the same one he'd used to coax lost pets out of hiding more times than he could count. He heard the pups breathing, ragged and scared, but it meant Eli was still fighting. Minutes dragged by, thick and heavy. The sun climbed higher, golden light spilling over the park and warming the faces of those gathered. It did nothing for the chill that settled in Daniel's chest, the cold dread of knowing time mattered. To pass the seconds, Daniel kept talking. To Maddie, to Eli, even to the crowd. He told stories about Scout, about all the lost animals he'd helped find. He talked about hope, about not giving up, and the stubborn persistence that sometimes made all the difference. His words weren't just for Maddie, they were for everyone, weaving an invisible thread of comfort and courage through the small, makeshift community. As the minutes ticked on, Daniel saw a flicker of movement in Maddie's eyes. It was more than just fear. It was trust. She was trusting him, this stranger, with everything she loved in the world. That responsibility felt heavy and sacred. Finally, the crackle of the radio broke the spell. The rescue team was on its way. ETA 10 minutes. Daniel relayed the news to the crowd, his voice stronger now. "Help's almost here. Let's clear a path so they can work fast." People shifted, rising from the grass, murmuring encouragement to Maddie. One of the teenagers took off his hoodie and offered it to Daniel, who draped it gently over Maddie's back. "You're doing great, girl. He's hanging on for you." Maddie barely registered the warmth, her focus unbroken. A new figure approached, a volunteer from Animal Control, carrying bottles of water and an emergency kit. She knelt beside Maddie, offering her water in a small bowl. Maddie lapped at it, distracted and exhausted, her nose never leaving the well. As the rescue team's sirens grew louder, Daniel felt the world narrow down to this small circle. Him, Maddie, and the soft, distant sounds of Eli. For all the anxiety in the air, there was also a growing sense of hope. Like the first warmth after a long night, Daniel looked up at the sky, took a deep breath, and let himself believe. In a world where things often went wrong, sometimes, just sometimes, the right people came together at exactly the right moment. He squeezed Maddie's shoulder gently. "Almost there," he whispered, the words more prayer than promise. Maddie answered with a soft, determined whine, her devotion unwavering. The distant wail of sirens grew louder, and the small crowd pressed in, hearts pounding in unison, ready to witness a miracle. The sirens sliced through the heavy quiet, growing louder as they drew closer to Willow Park. For those gathered, neighbors, rangers, even the morning joggers, the world had become impossibly small, focused to a pinpoint around the forgotten well. Daniel's heart drummed with anxious hope as he watched Maddie. She was motionless now, spent from her earlier frenzy, but every part of her seemed to strain toward the darkness where her pup was hidden. The rescue vehicles screeched to a halt by the main gate. Doors flew open and men and women in Navy uniforms spilled out, carrying coils of rope, harnesses, portable floodlights, and first aid kits. Captain Sarah Miles led the way, her expression all business as she sized up the scene. She exchanged a quick word with Daniel, who nodded and relayed what he knew. "Puppy, name's Eli, fell about 15 feet. Still responsive, he's been crying." Sarah's team fanned out, their practiced motions steady and swift. They erected a perimeter with bright caution tape, gently but firmly urging the crowd back to give space. The small assembly complied, shuffling to the edge of the grass, eyes locked on the rescue. But not Maddie. She sat rooted at the rim, eyes fixed on the stone circle, body tense as a bowstring. Daniel knelt by her side, murmuring reassurances, offering her sips of water, but she ignored all comfort, gaze never shifting. If anyone tried to move her, she'd whine, a low, trembling sound, equal parts warning and plea. As the rescue team worked, Daniel noticed the world fading away beyond this small patch of grass. The distant buzz of the city, the early honks from nearby traffic, the soft chirp of birds, all melted into a background hum. The only reality was here. The well, Maddie, and the fragile hope of Eli's faint whimpers from below. He watched as the team lowered a slim floodlight on a cable, illuminating the darkness with pale gold. A gasp rippled through the crowd as the camera feed popped up on a monitor. There at the bottom, Eli's trembling body came into focus. Dusty, scared, his big ears flattened, but alive. Every so often he lifted his head and let out a soft, confused yip. Maddie's ears shot up each time, her tail thrumming with the pain of hope. Daniel placed a comforting hand on Maddie's shoulders. "He's okay, girl," he whispered. "They see him." It was the first real sign that things might turn around. The tension in the crowd loosened a fraction, though nobody dared breathe easy yet. Sarah knelt beside Daniel and Maddie, her voice gentle but resolute. "We'll need to lower someone down. It'll be tricky. Old stone, some loose rock. But we've done worse. She glanced at Maddie, then back to Daniel. Can you keep her calm? Daniel nodded, his own nerves jangling. I'll stay right here. Time slowed. The world seemed to shrink to Daniel's heartbeat, to Maddie's shallow breathing, to the distant sound of Eli's claws scrabbling against stone. Daniel spoke softly, telling Maddie about Scout, about the day he'd waited in the rain, about hope that comes when you need it most. Maddie's eyes never left the hole, but her trembling lessened as his voice washed over her. For a brief moment, Daniel felt an invisible thread binding the three of them. A ranger, a mother, and a pup, each waiting for rescue in their own way. Sarah's team worked fast. They secured harnesses, tested lines, checked anchor points against the gnarled roots of the old oaks. The crowd stood silent, not wanting to break the spell. Some clasping hands, others murmuring prayers. Daniel realized, with a strange sense of awe, how many hearts beat together in that moment. How many strangers were united by the fate of one small dog. A light breeze rustled the grass. Maddie blinked, exhaustion settling into her bones, but she refused to move from her vigil. Daniel poured a little water into the bowl. She ignored it again. The only thing that mattered was the voice from below, the tether of hope she refused to let go. Finally, Sarah called out, "Ready!" And a rescuer in a helmet and harness stepped forward. The silence was absolute as he clipped into the line. Maddie stiffened as if every muscle were willing herself into the well alongside him. Daniel squeezed her gently, whispering, "Almost there, girl. Almost there." The rescuer disappeared into the shaft, the rope spinning slowly. On the monitor, the camera showed Eli, eyes wide and uncertain. The rescuer's gloved hand reached out, gentle and careful, a slow miracle in the half-light. The process was delicate, each second stretching impossibly long. Up above, Daniel's throat tightened. He felt the weight of all the moments he'd ever waited, all the helpless prayers he'd ever sent into the dark. Around him, the crowd seemed to draw closer, each person silently rooting for Eli, for Maddie, for rescue itself. Maddie's body finally sagged, not in defeat, but in exhaustion. She sat back, tail curled around her paws, chest still rising and falling with shallow, rapid breaths. She didn't take her eyes off the shaft. Daniel felt her lean against him, as if she needed to borrow a little of his strength. He let his mind drift for a moment, thinking about what this meant, how a dog's love could bring a whole town to a halt, how hope could spread from one howl to a dozen, then 100. He understood something quietly profound. Sometimes the bravest thing is simply to wait, to hope, to refuse to leave when someone you love is trapped in the dark. The world held its breath. Lights flickered in the well. The rope strained against the weight of fear and hope and memory, and through it all, Maddie sat, unwavering, determined not to leave until her pup was safe. Captain Sarah Miles double-checked the harness, her face set with the determined calm of someone who had faced crisis before. The rescue team had run through their safety checks, ropes coiled and locked, helmets fitted, radios tested. The narrow mouth of the well glared up at them, its ring of stones worn and slick with moss, its secret depths colder and darker than anyone would like to imagine. The crowd had been pushed back a few more feet, orange cones marking the edge of the danger zone. But Maddie refused to budge. She stood at Daniel's side, muscles quivering with anticipation, her eyes never leaving the dark circle where her pup had vanished. The leash was coiled near her feet, now a silent witness to everything that had come before. Sarah gave Daniel a quick nod. "We're ready." Daniel knelt beside Maddie and stroked her neck. "Almost there, girl. Almost there." Maddie licked his hand, a brief automatic gesture, then turned back, her body taut as a drawn bow. The selected rescuer, a young woman named Lisa, looked down the shaft, her flashlight beam chasing shadows along the rough stone. She spoke into her radio, her voice a little tight. "Lowering now. Spotters ready?" The team murmured their assent. The rope groaned as Lisa was slowly lowered into the well, her boots scraping the stones, the harness squeaking quietly with every inch. Above, the crowd pressed in, the air thick with suspense. Nobody spoke. The Beagle woman clutched her hands to her chest. The jogger stood with fists balled, his phone forgotten. Even the children, usually so restless, held perfectly still. Daniel squeezed Maddie's shoulder, feeling the tension radiate from her. Every now and then, she whimpered, soft and desperate, the sound making the hair stand on the back of his neck. Inside the well, the cold closed in quickly. Lisa's flashlight caught on roots jutting from between the stones, bits of rusted metal, damp spots where rain had leaked through cracks. The air was thick and musty, the smell of old earth and rotting leaves mingling with something sharper, the scent of fear and adrenaline. Eli's whimpers grew louder as she descended, his voice a thread of hope in the dark. "It's okay, buddy," Lisa called gently, her voice echoing strangely off the stone walls. "You're not alone. I'm coming for you." She reached the bottom, boots crunching against loose gravel and bits of broken stone. Eli cowered against the far wall, his body pressed into a hollow, his eyes wide and shining in the flashlight's beam. His fur was streaked with dirt and trembling with cold, but when Lisa crouched and extended her gloved hand, he inched forward, ears flattened. She moved slowly, speaking in low, soothing tones. "That's it. Good boy. You're safe now. I promise." Above, Sarah's voice crackled over the radio. "How's it look, Lisa?" "Pup's scared, but seems okay. No obvious injuries. Gonna try the harness now." Lisa produced a soft harness and slid it carefully over Eli's head, murmuring encouragement. Eli whimpered, flinched, but didn't pull away. The gentle firmness in Lisa's touch was enough to reassure him. It took a minute to secure the straps. Every sound and every movement above ground seemed to pause, suspended in this moment of fragile hope. Up at the rim, Daniel watched the live feed from Lisa's helmet camera on the rescue truck's small screen. Maddie pressed close, as if she could see her pup through sheer force of will. When Eli's face appeared on the monitor, eyes huge and scared but alive, a soft, collective gasp ran through the crowd. Daniel smiled for the first time in what felt like hours, blinking away sudden tears. "Okay, starting the ascent," Lisa's voice echoed, steady now, a thread of confidence lacing through the tension. "Nice and easy." The rope tightened. The harness pulled gently at Eli's chest, and he let out a startled bark. But Lisa kept a hand on him, her grip reassuring. Slowly, the pair began to rise, the sound of rope and harness creaking their way up. Bits of dirt and gravel rained down from the walls as they went, but Lisa kept murmuring, her calm steadying the pup as they neared the surface. Maddie's whole body trembled now, not with fear but anticipation. Daniel had to hold her collar gently to keep her from launching herself into the well as the rope inched upward. "Hang on, girl," he whispered. "He's coming. He's really coming." The last few feet felt endless. Lisa's helmet came into view first, Then Eli's trembling body, paws drawn up, ears back but alert. As soon as his head cleared the rim, Maddie lunged forward, nearly knocking Daniel off balance. She barked, tail thrashing, eyes blazing with desperate hope. Lisa swung Eli out of the well and set him gently on the grass. Maddie pounced, licking Eli all over, whining, yipping, circling him as if to count every paw and ear, to make sure her puppy was real and whole. Eli collapsed into her side, his tail wagging in quick, wild arcs, both of them trembling and tangled together, lost in a storm of relief. The crowd erupted in applause and cheers, some people weeping openly. Even the toughest faces softened at the sight. Daniel let out a shaky breath he hadn't known he was holding, feeling the weight of fear lift from his chest. Lisa unhooked her harness, grinning through smudges of dirt. "He's safe, Captain," she reported, her voice thick with emotion. Sarah nodded, a smile breaking through her stoic expression. But it was Maddie's reaction that said everything. Her refusal to let Eli out of her sight, the endless stream of kisses, the way she planted herself between her pup and the rest of the world. The park was full of people, but for Maddie, there was only Eli. For a moment, the world was only light and noise and love. A rescue witnessed by a whole community, but lived most deeply by a mother who refused to give up. Eli was out. He was shaking, small and filthy, but his paws touched solid ground. He was alive, and that was all that mattered to Maddie. The second Lisa unfastened the rescue harness and stepped back, Maddie surged forward, nearly bowling over everyone in her path. She buried her nose in Eli's fur, whimpering and licking him with wild urgency, circling around him so tightly it was as if she wanted to pull him inside her heart and never let go again. Eli's tail thumped against the grass. He pressed his face into Maddie's neck, whining with relief, his tiny body still shuddering. He didn't understand the crowd, the lights, or the cheers, but he understood his mother. Her warmth, her scent, her endless love. For a long, perfect moment, Maddie and Eli became their own world. A tight, trembling knot of fur, relief, and reunion at the center of Willow Park. The crowd watched in quiet awe. The elderly woman who had first stumbled to the scene wiped tears from her cheeks. The jogger who dialed 911 let out a whoop, grinning through the lump in his throat. A few children, unable to hold back their joy, darted forward with handmade signs that read, "Yay, Eli," and "Hero Mom." Even the rescue team paused, sharing tired smiles, their hard-won composure slipping for just a minute as they watched the reunion. Daniel stood a few steps away, wiping sweat and maybe a tear from his brow. He'd seen emergencies before, heartbreaks, and even the occasional miracle, but something about this moment felt different. Maybe it was the way the whole community had rallied, or the way Maddie's refusal to give up had become a kind of prayer everyone could believe in. He felt a surge of pride for his role in the rescue, but even more he felt humbled, reminded of how much courage could be found in something as small as a mother's howl. Sarah Miles, usually the model of stoic professionalism, crouched beside Lisa. "Nice work," she said, voice husky with emotion. "You did great down there." Lisa grinned, still catching her breath. "Couldn't have done it without the little guy's spirit. He's a fighter." Sarah nodded, her gaze softening as she looked at Eli and Maddie together. Daniel moved closer, kneeling beside the two dogs. Maddie glanced at him, her amber eyes shimmering with gratitude and lingering anxiety. Daniel smiled gently, reaching out to scratch her behind the ears. "You did it, Maddie," he murmured. "You brought him home." Maddie nuzzled his hand, then turned back to Eli, as if afraid he might disappear again. The rescue team checked Eli over, their hands gentle and reassuring. They cleaned a scrape on his paw, felt along his ribs for injuries, and offered him a bit of water. Eli lapped at it cautiously, still unsure but comforted by the touch of his mother. Maddie watched everything with sharp, protective eyes, allowing no one too close for long. When a paramedic tried to set a blanket under Eli, Maddie barked, tail high, forcing him to move slower, more respectfully. The crowd chuckled at her fierce devotion. Then, as if the tension of the last hour finally caught up with them, Maddie and Eli curled up together right in the grass, Eli tucked against her chest. Maddie rested her head on his back, her breathing finally settling into a rhythm that spoke of peace and exhaustion. Daniel watched them, feeling the last of his own nerves unwind. In the background, the applause faded to soft conversations and quiet laughter. People began sharing their stories, how they'd heard the barking, how they'd known something terrible, and then something wonderful was happening in their park. Sarah Miles gave Daniel a quiet nod. "You did good work today, Ranger. Community needed this." Daniel shrugged, his gaze never leaving the two dogs. "Maddie did all the hard work," he replied. "I just answered the call." Sarah smiled, the compliment warming her expression. "Well, it's a reminder. A lot of us would go a little further, climb a little deeper, if we knew someone up top was refusing to leave." Camera crews arrived, local news reporters eager to get the story. Daniel did his best to keep them back, but the sight of Maddie and Eli was too compelling. A mother and her pup, survivors and heroes. The park was suddenly filled with camera flashes and microphone wires, but Daniel and the rescue team managed to keep a respectful distance, shielding Maddie and Eli as best they could from the worst of the frenzy. Some neighbors brought over blankets and a bowl of water. Others offered treats, though Maddie was too keyed up to accept them. A little girl tiptoed close, crouched down, and placed a handmade card on the grass, covered in crayon hearts, and a big "Thank you, Maddie" scrawled across the front. Maddie sniffed it once, then gently nudged it closer to Eli. Slowly, the adrenaline began to ebb. The crowd, which had felt like a single living creature, started to drift into small clusters, some heading home, some lingering, unwilling to let go of the miracle they'd witnessed. Daniel sat cross-legged on the grass, just outside Maddie's protective circle, feeling the aftershocks of the moment settle into something deeper, a gratitude that filled his chest, warm and weightless. Maddie and Eli lay together, the center of a story that would ripple through Willow Park for weeks, maybe years. The sharp edge of crisis was gone, replaced by something gentle, a sense that for once, hope had answered a call, and the world, for a brief and shining moment, was exactly as it should be. Daniel looked around, seeing the familiar park through new eyes. He watched Maddie's chest rise and fall, listened to Eli's soft sighs, and thought of all the times he'd believed that life was just a string of small, ordinary days. Today, he realized, was not one of those days. Today, they had all been witnesses to something extraordinary: the power of a mother's love, the strength of a community, and the promise that no one has to wait in the dark alone. In the hours after Eli's rescue, Willow Park felt transformed. The crisis had drawn neighbors from their routines and strangers from their shells, all converging around the old well that had, for a moment, become the heart of the town. Where there had been fear and frantic urgency, now there was a gentle buzz, a mixture of relief, celebration, and lingering adrenaline. The news crews fanned out, eager to interview witnesses and catch shots of Maddie and Eli, their cameras catching every nuzzle and lick. Children lined up to pet Eli, their parents close behind, offering words of praise and comfort to Maddie, the heroine of the day. Homemade signs, "Welcome home, Eli," "Thank you, rescuers," appeared on trees and benches, taped up with colorful drawings of happy dogs and bright red hearts. The city moved quickly. Orange tape and bright safety cones circled the old well, and by late afternoon, public works crews arrived to build a sturdy wooden barrier and post a warning sign. "Danger, unsafe well, do not approach." A city official made a short speech about the importance of safety and the swift action of the community, and promised every dangerous well in Willow Park would be inspected and secured within a week. The mayor herself, in a sharp blue blazer, knelt in the grass to offer Maddie a special medallion, shaped like a golden paw print, that she fastened gently to Maddie's collar. Eli barked with excitement as the crowd clapped and snapped photos. Daniel watched from the sidelines, quietly moved. He'd expected the aftermath to be a return to normal, but something had shifted in the air. Neighbors who had only ever exchanged nods now hugged or shook hands, their shared experience forming the beginnings of real friendships. People lingered, sharing stories not just about the rescue, but about lost pets, near misses, and the small miracles that sometimes unfolded when everyone pulled together. Some offered Daniel coffee or heartfelt thanks. Others left small bouquets of flowers at the well, turning the once-forgotten sight into a symbol of hope. Maddie and Eli became local celebrities. Children drew pictures for them, colorful crayon sketches of Maddie barking bravely at the well, Eli peeking out, and rescue workers lowering ropes. The town's vet arrived, offering to give Eli and Maddie a free checkup, declaring both healthy though in need of rest, and plenty of treats. A local bakery delivered a batch of pup cakes, dog-friendly cupcakes, for the brave duo, and soon Maddie and Eli were munching contentedly, surrounded by admirers. Daniel felt the change inside himself, too. He found himself laughing more easily, speaking more openly, even letting himself accept praise he'd normally wave away. That evening, as the park quieted and the sun cast long golden rays through the trees, Daniel sat on a bench, Maddie's head in his lap, Eli stretched out by her side. People he'd never spoken to before approached to thank him, to shake his hand, to share their own stories of hope, loss, and rescue. But with the calm came a new problem, one nobody had anticipated. As word of the rescue spread, so did concern about the safety of Willow Park and its hidden dangers. Parents whispered anxiously about other old wells, loose stones, forgotten hazards. One mother approached Daniel, her brow furrowed. "Are there more of these?" she asked, glancing at the new barricade. "My kids play here every day." Daniel listened, feeling the weight of responsibility settle back on his shoulders. "We're doing a full inspection," he promised. "We'll check every inch, I swear." Still, the questions continued. Should they let their dogs off-leash? Was the playground safe? Would the city really follow through? In the days that followed, Daniel worked late, walking the park's paths with a flashlight and a clipboard, checking every dip in the ground, every out-of-place stone. He coordinated with the city's public works department and made maps of possible hazards. More than once, Maddie joined him, trailing at his side as if she too understood the importance of making the park safe for everyone. The community's attention shifted to prevention. Volunteer groups formed, organizing cleanup days, and a neighborhood watch for the park was established almost overnight. Parents signed up for first aid training. A group of teenagers started a social media page, posting updates about the ongoing inspections, fundraising for new playground equipment, and sharing photos of Maddie and Eli as honorary park mascots. Daniel was invited to speak at the local elementary school. He brought Maddie and Eli with him, standing in front of rows of eager faces. He talked about courage and community, about listening for cries for help and never being afraid to answer. "Sometimes, the bravest thing you can do is show up for someone else," he said. Maddie sat at his feet, regal and proud, while Eli wagged his tail at every giggle and gasp from the students. Back at the park, things felt different, more connected, more alive. The well was still there, but now it was surrounded by flowers, thank you notes, and painted rocks that read hope, courage, and together. It became a kind of shrine, not to fear, but to the power of a single voice, Maddie's howl, that had brought an entire town to action. Daniel realized as he watched Maddie and Eli nap in the grass that evening that the rescue had changed them all. It wasn't just a happy ending, it was a beginning. The bond between neighbors, the spark of responsibility, the willingness to step up for each other, these would outlast the headlines and the fading excitement. The crisis had passed, but its lessons lingered, quietly reshaping Willow Park and all who called it home. And as twilight settled over the park, Daniel felt a deep, quiet gratitude for the aftershock, a sense that sometimes what comes after the storm can be even more powerful than the storm itself. Long after the rescue had faded from headlines and the cameras disappeared from Willow Park, the echo of Maddie's howl lingered in Daniel's memory. The sun was just dipping below the horizon, painting the sky with streaks of amber and violet. The park was quiet, the rush of celebration gone, replaced by the gentle rhythm of evening, kids' laughter drifting from the playground, a distant dog barking, the low hum of cicadas coming alive in the dusk. Daniel sat beneath the old oak, not far from the barricaded well, with Maddie and Eli sprawled beside him in the cool grass. Maddie's chin rested on her pup's back, her eyes half closed in a peace that had eluded her for days. Eli, finally free of his ordeal, was curled into her warmth, snoring softly, a paw twitching in some innocent dream. Around them, the world felt slower, more meaningful, as if the ordinary had cracked open to reveal something rare and beautiful. Daniel watched them for a long time, the day's stress melting away. It would have been easy for the rescue to become just another story, a headline, a viral video, a quick moment of shared attention before the world moved on. But something about Maddie's stubborn love and the way the whole community had responded wouldn't let him go. He found himself turning the day's events over in his mind, searching for meaning in every detail. He realized that what he'd witnessed was more than a dramatic rescue. It was a living lesson about loyalty, love, and the quiet power of persistence. Maddie had never left Eli's side, even when every instinct must have screamed at her to run, to hide, to save herself from heartbreak. Her devotion hadn't needed words or heroic gestures. It was the steady, relentless refusal to let go, the way she'd howled until the world stopped and listened. Daniel understood now that sometimes love didn't look like fireworks or speeches. It looked like standing your ground, refusing to walk away, even when hope seemed lost. As he sat there, Daniel thought back to all the small moments that had added up to a miracle. The jogger who stopped and called for help instead of passing by. The children who drew pictures and left them by the well. The rescue workers who braved the darkness without hesitation. Each one had answered a call that hadn't even been meant for them, a ripple of empathy that grew with every new voice. Maddie's howl had traveled further than sound. It had reached into people's hearts, reminding them that everyone, at some point, needs someone willing to answer. A light breeze rustled through the leaves above, and Daniel closed his eyes, letting the lesson settle in his bones. He thought about Scout, the dog he'd lost as a boy, and all the years he'd tried to convince himself that moving on meant letting go. Now, watching Maddie and Eli, he saw that loyalty didn't end with the rescue. It lived in the everyday, in every decision to show up, to reach out, to wait by the well for someone who might need you. Daniel felt Maddie's head press against his hand, her fur warm and soft. He scratched her behind the ears, and she looked up at him, her gaze wise and grateful. "You taught us all something, Maddie," he said quietly. "You reminded us what it means to fight for someone you love, and you showed us that hope isn't just for the lucky. It's for anyone willing to keep trying, even when the odds are against them." He glanced over at the well, now safely covered, the barricade ringed with painted rocks and paper flowers. It looked almost ordinary, just another old relic in the park. But to Daniel, it had become a symbol, a place where darkness and fear had given way to hope and courage. It struck him that the well wasn't just a hole in the ground. It was every setback, every dark moment, every time someone felt alone or out of reach. And the rescue? That was what happened when people refused to turn away, when they answered the call, when they chose to stay. Daniel's phone buzzed. A text from a neighbor. "Thanks again for today. My kids slept with their flashlights tonight, just in case anyone needs help." Daniel smiled, feeling a strange kinship with everyone who'd gathered at the well. He realized, with a quiet certainty, that community was more than proximity or shared space. It was built on listening, on noticing when someone was hurting, and on the courage to show up, even when it wasn't easy. The lesson of the day, Daniel thought, was that everyone needed rescuing sometimes, and everyone had the chance to be a rescuer too. Whether it was a stray pup in a well, a lonely neighbor in need of a friend, or a town waking up to its own responsibilities, the act of answering was what made the difference. As twilight deepened, Daniel leaned back, content, watching Maddie and Eli sleep in the soft grass. He felt grateful for the ordeal, not because it had ended happily, but because it had revealed something strong and good at the heart of the community. Loyalty, persistence, and hope. These weren't just words, but living things, tested and proven on a quiet morning that had begun like any other. He let the moment linger, the lesson settling in, and promised himself that he would carry it forward, into every day, every call, every quiet act of showing up for someone else. Because as Maddie had shown him, sometimes all it takes to change a life is refusing to walk away. The days after the rescue were unlike anything Willow Park had seen before. What began as a frantic emergency slowly blossomed into something deeper, a movement that seemed to spread through the community like sunlight after a storm. Daniel watched the change unfold not only in the park itself, but in the faces and voices of the people around him. It started with small gestures. Families who had hurried home after the rescue came back the next day, bringing snacks and extra water bowls for Maddie and Eli. Kids insisted on taking the long way through the park, dragging their parents to see the now iconic well and the hand-painted rocks that ringed it. Some families brought their own paints, leaving behind fresh flowers and more rocks covered with words like believe, loyalty, and never give up. Daniel found himself invited to coffee by neighbors he'd only ever waved to before. People lingered on park benches, sharing stories and laughter as if a new thread connected them. The mayor's promise was kept. Within days, every well and drain in the park had been inspected, repaired, and safely covered. Public works teams even hosted a safety day, inviting kids to learn about hazards and watch demonstrations by rescue workers. For once, the park felt truly safe, the undercurrent of anxiety replaced by a proactive energy. The rescue's impact didn't stop with physical changes. At the weekly farmers' market, conversations buzzed with tales of Maddie and Eli. Vendors offered discounts for community heroes, a term that, much to Daniel's embarrassment, people began to use for him as well. Children ran up to him and Maddie for high fives, eager to share their own stories of helping a friend or caring for a pet. The local school art teacher created a mural featuring Maddie, Eli, and their rescuers, framed by swirling lines meant to represent the echoes of Maddie's howl spreading through the community. Daniel's own perspective was changing too. Each morning when he laced up his boots, he felt the weight and the privilege of being part of something larger than himself. He saw the way Maddie had become a symbol, her fierce devotion inspiring people to look out for one another. At the dog park, pet owners swapped stories about moments they'd stepped up for their animals or neighbors. "I never used to talk to anyone," one older man confided as he watched his terrier play. "But now I feel like we're all in this together." The city council invited Daniel to speak at their monthly meeting. He stood in front of an unusually packed room, Maddie sitting proudly at his feet and Eli chewing a rubber bone beside her. Daniel spoke not about heroics, but about the power of a single act of courage to awaken something in everyone. "When Maddie refused to leave," he said, "she reminded us what loyalty looks like in action. And when you all answered her call, you reminded me what a real community can do." That message stuck. Soon, other groups in town started projects inspired by the rescue. A high school senior launched a kindness patrol, recruiting classmates to help elderly neighbors with yard work or groceries. A book club collected stories about courage and connection, eventually publishing them in a slim volume that circulated through the library. The neighborhood association organized more cleanup days, repainting playground equipment and planting a garden near the old well, turning it into a living monument. Daniel watched these ripples with awe. He found himself drawn into more conversations, hearing about people's hopes and worries, and sometimes lending a hand or an ear. His own loneliness, once a quiet ache he carried in the background of his busy days, began to ease as new friendships took root. Even Maddie, who had once been known only to a handful of regulars, now wore her golden paw print tag with a gentle dignity, a living reminder of what they'd all achieved together. The most moving change, however, was how people began to talk about safety and responsibility, not out of fear, but from a place of care. Parents walked the park trails together, checking on one another's kids. Teens organized dog walking clubs, each member responsible for a friend's pet. There was a new culture of looking out for the small things: loose fence boards, litter near the playground, a stranger sitting alone on a bench. Instead of waiting for someone else to act, people began stepping up. As for the old well, it was no longer a sight of dread. The garden around it flourished, tended by volunteers and watered by kids who took pride in watching their flowers bloom. The stones were polished smooth by countless hands, the bright rocks at its base shifting every week as new ones appeared. The mural from the school was hung nearby, a burst of color and hope for all to see. On a sunny Saturday, Daniel sat on the grass near the well, Maddie's head in his lap, Eli dozing at her side. He watched families pass by, watched neighbors wave and greet one another, and listened to the laughter of children echoing off the trees. The memory of Maddie's desperate howling still lingered, but now it was joined by new sounds: laughter, music, conversation. Hope, once a distant promise, had become part of the very fabric of Willow Park. Looking around, Daniel realized that this was the real heart of community, not just showing up in a crisis, but weaving a network of care that could hold everyone, every day. And as the sun set, casting golden light across the grass, he felt a quiet certainty that even a single act of courage could heal more than one heart. It could change an entire town. As the summer sun dipped toward the horizon, Daniel found himself returning once more to Willow Park. The transformation was unmistakable. Where the well had once stood forgotten and dangerous, there was now a small, vibrant garden brimming with wildflowers and hand-painted rocks. The laughter of children echoed across the open lawn, and families picnicked beneath the sheltering oaks, their voices weaving into the gentle evening air. Yet the memory of that desperate morning, the fear, the unity, the relief, still pulsed quietly beneath it all. That night, Daniel had agreed to film a short message for the local news. He was nervous, unused to the attention, but the station manager insisted that the town needed a gentle reminder, a final echo of the hope and courage that had drawn everyone together. He arrived at sunset, Maddie and Eli trotting at his side, both still local celebrities. Eli, now plump and confident, pounced at fireflies under Maddie's watchful gaze as Daniel greeted the small camera crew. They chose a spot with the mural in the background, the painting of Maddie, Eli, the well, and a swirl of bright lines symbolizing the echo that had awakened a whole town. Daniel knelt in the grass, Maddie at his knee and Eli leaning into his chest, eyes bright and trusting. The camera's red light flickered on. Daniel took a breath, steadying himself. He didn't want to repeat the story for the 100th time, didn't want to focus on the danger or the drama. Instead, he spoke quietly, as if talking to a friend, or to his younger self, years ago, waiting for Scout to come home. For me, this isn't just a story about a dog and her pup. It's living proof of unconditional loyalty, the kind of devotion that refuses to let go, even when the world goes dark. Maddie never gave up. She didn't have words or a plan. She just kept howling, calling for help, believing someone would answer, and that call reached all of you. He glanced at Maddie, who thumped her tail softly. That's the power of community, he continued. It's not just about what we do in an emergency, but how we show up every day. It's the way a neighbor pauses to check on you, the way strangers come together to make a place safe, the way a child's drawing or a kind word can carry you through. Daniel paused, watching as Eli wriggled closer. If you have a loyal friend by your side, someone who's waited with you in the dark or pulled you out of it, maybe take a moment and give them a hug. And if this story touched you, I'd love for you to share your own moment of hope or courage. Maybe your story is the hope someone else needs today. And if you'd like to hear more, well, feel free to like, comment, or subscribe. Every bit of kindness, every shared story helps light the way for someone else. The camera lingered as Daniel gently stroked Maddie's fur, her head resting peacefully in his lap. Eli dozed at his feet, finally free from fear and uncertainty. The park behind them was alive with the quiet joy of a community at peace. Neighbors talking, children playing, dogs weaving between picnic blankets. It felt like the whole town had exhaled together, letting go of worry and welcoming in something softer, something brighter. When the camera cut, Daniel sat with Maddie and Eli as the sky darkened and stars began to prick through the deep blue. He thought back over everything, the panic and heartbreak, the fear of not being enough, and the moment when he realized he wasn't alone. He remembered the way Maddie had pressed against him at the well's edge, the way the crowd had gathered and grown, the way hope had become something you could see and hear and hold. It struck him that true rescue was never the act of one person alone. It was the ripple of voices, the network of hands, the persistence of a single mother's howl answered by an entire community. Daniel understood now that sometimes being brave meant simply showing up. Sometimes it meant refusing to turn away. And sometimes the most powerful change began with the quiet act of listening, of believing that every cry matters and that everyone deserves to be heard. He glanced at Maddie and Eli, curled together in the grass. The moment was quiet, ordinary in its peace, but to Daniel, it felt sacred. He saw not just a dog and her pup, but living proof that courage and hope weren't grand gestures. They were woven from everyday choices, from 1,000 small moments when someone decided to care. As the first fireflies blinked around them, Daniel sent up a silent promise to keep answering, to keep listening, to keep the light alive. He hoped that whoever heard his words, whether they were facing a crisis or just the slow ache of loneliness, would remember that even the smallest voice could start an echo. That hope, once kindled, could be passed from heart to heart, lighting the way for someone still waiting in the dark. He stood, stretched, and gathered Maddie and Eli to him, their warmth a reminder of all that was good and possible. With the park quiet and safe at their backs, Daniel led them home beneath the summer stars, the memory of Maddie's howl now just one bright note in the symphony of Willow Park, a story not of fear, but of the power of holding on and of passing the light on to others.